Now that we are done with the Minimalist LangChain series, in which we wanted to go as quickly as possible from zero to an agent, we've got some time to get back to some basics and explore a few interesting functionalities from LangChain. Today it will be about the prompt templates, and we will see a few examples, starting with a single message, then a conversation, and finally we will integrate everything in a chain. The first step, as usual, is to create a LLM client, so you can communicate with your favorite LLM. And like in the previous videos, I will use Mistral AI, but feel free to use a different provider. If you are unsure about this step, check the first video in this LangChain series, in which we explain how you can use different providers. And of course, don't forget your API key in the environment variables, because LangChain will try to load it automatically. Here you go. So if you want to create a template for a prompt, you will find all the different classes within this prompt module. So still in LangChain core, as we did for the messages, but this time within prompts. And the simplest one is the prompt template. Then I can assign to a variable this prompt template, and don't forget the method that you do it from a template, because there are a few other options that we will not see today. For example, to import a template from an existing file. A template here, it refers to a simple string in which you include some placeholders for variables with these curly braces. So you see here, hello, my name is, and I expect that when I will run my LLM application or my agent, I will inject here a value. So I will substitute this placeholder with the actual value. This is exactly the same syntax as the Python f string. The only difference is that you don't have here the f prefix. And you see that if I will add it here, then I've got an error in my code because it tells me that this variable is not initialized. This is the big difference between the f string and a prompt template in LangChain. In LangChain, you don't need to have the variable initialized before the runtime. And it's quite interesting functionality, actually. So I remember some projects at work. What I could do is I could create an entire library of prompt templates in a separate file that had no idea about the actual values that I want to inject later. So that was quite easy to manage the project and to import all my templates from an external file. So this is one of the reasons why you may want to use the prompt templates instead of a classic f string. If I run it, you see that it just creates a prompt template object, and it has a list of all the placeholders that I added, all these variables, and also the entire template here. So the next step for us will be to substitute these placeholders with the actual values before we can invoke the LLM. So with a prompt template, it's as simple as just invoking it and passing the values that you want to inject. As usual in LangChain, you use invoke when this is a runnable, and a prompt template is a runnable like your LLM client, like a tool, like almost everything in LangChain. So I invoke it, and then I pass a dictionary where there is the name of my placeholder, and there is also the value that I want to inject in the template. I'm writing also, in this specific case, we've got a single variable, so you could just pass a string. But if you are dealing with more than one placeholder, you need to absolutely pass a dictionary. And you can do it this way, and you see that it returns now the text where the placeholder was replaced with the value that I injected. So extremely simple. And then this specific object, which is saved in this field prompt variable, you can directly pass it to the LLM when you invoke it, and it will work. So here you see that I get back the AI message and say, hello, Tom. So I see that it received the actual value and not the template. So that was very simple so far. The second thing that we can review is that you can also create some templates for an entire conversation, or for several messages at once at least. So still in the LangChain core.prompts, this time I imported a few classes. So I take here the ChatPromptTemplate, but also the system MessagesPlaceholder and the human MessagesPlaceholder. So notice here, these are not the system message classes or human message classes that we imported previously. These are specifically template classes. So don't mix them up because they are different. The other one, you will find them in messages and not in prompts. So here again, I create a variable. I use this new class, which is specifically not for a single prompt, like here, PromptTemplate, but this is for a chat prompt. So chat prompt, and be careful also here, the method this time is not from template, but from messages, because we are going to inject a few messages in this instance of the class. I'm also writing here, be careful, something I often forget and I don't understand what the error message is that as we are injecting several messages, it needs to be absolutely a list, so don't forget these square brackets. And then within this list, you can just inject your different prompts. And once again, for each prompt, don't forget the method PromptTemplate. So basically, each time you want to inject or to create with placeholders, it needs to be a template class, and you need to use the method PromptTemplate. So here I'm simulating the beginning of a conversation. So there is a system prompt and there is a human message, and I want both to be able to change the attitude of my LLM and also to give my name. And here, when you want to field this template, this is exactly the same method as before. You invoke and you pass a dictionary. And as we have two placeholders within the entire template, we need to pass these two variables. So here I want the LLM to be a funny assistant, and my name is still Tom. And then, as usual, LLM.invoke, and you are passing this variable that is the field template. And let's see if it receives all the instructions. So we've got an AI message, hello Tom, so it got my name, adjust digital party hat. So I can see that it also understood that it's supposed to be a funny assistant. And finally, when we are dealing with several messages, what's also interesting, it's the possibility to create some placeholder for the conversation history. So here I will just start creating conversation history. So as we did in some previous videos, we create a Python list in which we store different messages. So we start with one message. I'm just saying, hello, this is a human message. And then I will pretend that I already received a message back from the assistant. So I added an AI message just saying, hello, how can I help you today? Then I will create a new chat prompt template, as we did in the previous cell, still from messages. Here, you see, I'm not using this time system, what's the exact name? System message prompt template. I'm just using a classic system message. The reason is, in that case, I didn't want to include any placeholder, so I don't need to use a template for this. I can use a system message, a classic one. After that, I include this new class that we haven't seen so far, which is the MessagesPlaceholder. You just need to pass a variable name. I decided to name it history. And here it will be able to inject the entire conversation history when we invoke the LLM. Okay. So basically, if we would do it now, when we've got these two messages, you can imagine that these two messages will be inserted here instead of this placeholder. So we will always have the system message, the entire conversation to date, and then we create a new template for the human in which we can just include the new question. So this is how you can effectively manage a conversation in LangChain. So you don't need to include the system message in your conversation history. You can make sure that it's always part of the template. Then you insert the entire history, and then you include the new question when you invoke the LLM. And as we did before, so we need to fill in the template now. So we take this template, we invoke, and we pass the dictionary with the different variables. So you see, there is no change in approach. Even if this is a new class, this message placeholder, we just need to pass the actual value. So I decided to name this placeholder history. So you see that here I've got the history key in my dictionary. And which value do I want to include here? This is my conversation list. So it includes all the messages. And then I also need to include a question, which will be the new question from the user. In that case, as an example, I'm just asking what is a prompt template, and I can invoke again the LLM. Let's do it. And we've got the AI message with explanation about this prompt template. Finally, if you remember in the previous video, we talked about chains. That was the second video about LangChain when we discussed messages, and that allowed us to invoke several components in a chain, actually. So instead of doing this approach where first you invoke your template to replace the value and then you invoke the LLM with the new template, what we could do, let's start here. We could just create a chain and say that first I want, for example, my chat template pipe to connect different components together, and then my LLM. And here we would invoke the chain instead of the template. So when I invoke the chain, it passes the dictionary to the chat template. Then it will be invoked with this input, and whatever is the output of this chat template when it's invoked will be passed as input to the LLM, which in turn will be invoked, and then the output will be the final answer from the LLM. So just to make it a bit more interactive here, I added everything in a loop, so we can have some back and forth conversation with a LLM, and this is something which looks a bit more realistic, what you will do in real life when you create a LLM application. So we start with an empty list for the conversation. We don't have any messages so far. And I created this template as we did in the previous cell, in which I included message placeholder. And then we can include a new question from the user. So it's exactly the template we used before, just the first time we will invoke it, the list will still be empty, but at each conversation turn, we will append the messages from ourselves when we ask a question, and from the assistant when we receive the message back from the LLM. So this is the template, and then you see I created the chain where I want it to go through first the chat template and then the LLM client. And I create an infinite loop in which I'm asking the user to type the question or to type Q to exit the loop. I'm checking if the user responded Q. In that case, I can break and we exit this infinite loop. Otherwise, I append to the conversation a human message that contains the question type by the user. After that, we can invoke, you see this time we don't invoke the template, but we invoke the chain. And we invoke it with the dictionary that contains everything that the first components, so the chat template needs, which is history, so the conversation list, and the question, which is the new question. So here it's quite simple. The history is always contained in our conversation list that we instantiated here. And it should contain, the first time we run it, just a single message, the one we just appended here. And then the question, this is also the one we received from the user, and that is part of the history. So we can provide it here. And finally, when we receive back the response from the LLM, we can append it, and we can just display the last two messages. So here I'm just selecting the last two messages. The reason is because I expect the other ones are already printed when I have different conversation turns. So I don't want to print the entire conversation again at each turn. Otherwise, I will end up with some duplicates. And as we have seen in the second video about messages in LangChain, you can print them, so it's easier to display them. So let's try to run it and just hello. If you haven't noticed, it's on top when this is a Jupyter notebook. So enter, and now it displays my message, but also the response from the LLM. Let's try again. My name is Tom. Nice to meet you. Okay, let's see if it really received the entire conversation. What is my name? Yeah, it knows. You told me earlier, so I remembered. Good boy, or good bot, I guess. What else can we ask? What was my first question? Now this is just cut by the notebook, but we can see the beginning here. Yeah, you greeted me at the start of the conversation. Hello. So we see that everything works as expected. So I will just exit it. So Q. And I think this will be it for this video. That's everything I wanted to show you, how you can use some prompt template in your conversation to more effectively manage the conversation history and be able to inject some context to your LLM. The next video will be about middlewares, so we will get back to the LangChain agents and we'll see how to implement the to-do list first, and after that, a virtual file system. So I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.